My name is Brian Ludberg, and I would like to give you the scope of my research. So basically, my research focuses on what I think are two prime motivators of human behavior, which is pleasure and pain. Pleasure is something we pursue, pain is something we avoid. In the process of doing those two things, I think we cause evil. And so my first question is, to what extent does this problem of obsessive pleasure affect the problem of evil? Notice I say obsessive pleasure, so I'm not just talking about your occasional Krispy Kreme donut. I'm talking about focus on pleasure to the extent to which we shut down the intellect. That to me is I want to know what effect does that have on the problem of evil. Secondary to that question is, can there be a better world without evil? What would happen if we did away with evil altogether? And I think that brings us up to the question of, or the point that the world is binary. Removing pain would also remove pleasure, that we can't have one without the other. And the research shows that uh, to be true. So the purpose of this dissertation is to analyze this relationship between pleasure and pain as prime motivators on us and how it affects the problem of evil. To me, it seems the failure to mediate the effect of poop as a prime motivator leads to a destructive behavior. I think we have evidence of this in history. Even within the Bible, we have evidence of this very thing. From a psychological and theological perspective, then, a cause of evil is presented as this problem of obsessive pleasure. Augustine observed that evil always injures, and such injury is a deprivation of good. In other words, for Augustine, good and evil are two and the same. Removing good and you're left with evil. And pain and pleasure are universally accepted as part of the human condition. No one would argue with this. We are aware of the pain as well as pleasure. It is what drives us as humans. And even as children, we know that we want to avoid any kind of pain or discomfort. It leads us a lot of times to lie because that's our way of getting out of trouble with our parents. So it cannot be argued that pain and pleasure are very much a part of this human condition. In fact, it is what led me to my studies at Trinity and my looking at this very well thing. As a licensed therapist, I deal with pain of people all the day, and I often have to give them answers. And giving them answers means I have to search, and I search from a world Christian perspective, not a world perspective. And ironically, a lot of times, the people that come to me looking for answers are also Christians, and we do not always have the same the answers or same views. And some people a lot of times come to me after they've been to the pastor and they're still left wondering and scratching their head. So for me, that is what personally has driven me to get more answers or to give answers, to be able to help other people. And that's what I think this research will do for other people and will just be good for Christendom. Despite the duality of this good and bad, and pleasure and pain, powerful motivators, are also the behavior and the problem of evil. So in other words, we're always struggling with this good and bad as part of our morality. And these are powerful motivators for our behavior. And when they're not in check, that overrides our intellect, our will, and our passions lead us down a path which I think is the extent of the problem of evil. Like I said earlier, the world is logically organized into binary opposites, or round binary opposites, or basic opposing forces, positive and negative, work and rest, day and night, are among many binary opposites that we find in the first chapter of Genesis that describes this very thing, which gives us a clue that how the world was created and how things are laid out for us. I've talked about the role of the intellect and the will, and I think it's impossible to do any research into human behavior, and not consider the role of the intellect and the will. A lot of times, it is often the perception of pain or pleasure, not the actual pain or pleasure itself, that drives our behavior. I know that sometimes the thought of the Krispy Kreme donut is enough to get my wheels in motion and to drive my behavior more than actually getting the Krispy Kreme donut. In fact, a lot of times after I finish the Krispy Kreme donut, my intellect kicks in and says, I don't know, I'm not sure why you did that. So the intellect is the human capacity to capitalize or to think or use a brain. The will, on the other hand, is the human motivational capacity, is the capacity that moves us to do what we do. The two are in sync. It's a beautiful, beautiful thing, but a lot of times the two are not in sync. I know that there are times that I've got myself saying, oh, I knew better. I shouldn't have done that. And that is a time when my intellect would tell me what to do, but my will overrode my intellect. So the intellect and the will are engaged in this dynamic, complex interaction with multiple stages between the initial perception of, say, that Krispy Kreme donut and the intellect to find the action of the will, with occasional interruptions and overrides by the passion. And that is often the area I am most concerned about and interested in, because I think that that overrides of our passions. In other words, obsessive need for pleasure that overrides our intellect and drives us into behaviors that we probably would not otherwise take part in. As mentioned, the word good can only mean good if there is also not good. So the word good anticipates and implies that evil exists. Because if I say the word good, you only know what I'm talking about because you know the opposite of good, which is evil. Language by nature separates. And as I mentioned before, paired binary opposites rely on each other for meaning. These are, of course, binary opposites. In other words, in order to know good, we also have to know evil, and vice versa. So we could argue successfully, I think, that Adam and Eve eating of the tree of knowledge of good and evil was the moment they acquired language. They acquired wisdom of both good and evil. And obviously, they couldn't know one without the other. Good and evil is probably the most consistently explored binary opposites in the Old Testament. The story of Cain and Abel initiates long, lengthy analysis between good and evil. And we see that in both these brothers. Both have different characters, both have different motivations, and we even find that Cain is motivated by envy and jealousy, revenge upon his brother Abel. I think it's very important to look at the two flavors of evil. We have natural evil and moral evil. Natural evil basically occurs independently of any kind of human action or thought. By natural evil, we are talking about disease, hurricanes, landslides, earthquakes, and you understand exactly what I'm talking about. Moral evil, on the opposite, is quite differently. Moral evil is committed by humans. And basically, by doing so, we understand that is free will. Because the free will argument states that the same moral freedom that allows for extreme acts of selflessness, like a fireman running into a building fire to rescue people, is also the same moral freedom or the same free will that allows for horrific acts of evil. The same type thing. Gratuitous evil will always be possible in a world occupied by free moral agents who are generally unabated by the coercive nature of God. So here we find the problem again. That is, removing good would remove evil. Removing evil would remove good. Because it's this very free will that we're talking about allows for both actions to occur. I think it's very important in this research to look at some of the major philosophical and religious thoughts concerning moral evil. In Judaism, moral evil is a result of disassociating from God's will expressed in His laws. Christianity is also the same thing. Is evil results from disuniting from God's will. Islam is not too far off. What not, Islam teaches that a knowledge of right and wrong is intrinsic to human nature. Now, we are born with that very thing. So if we do wrong, we knowingly know we are doing wrong. Plato sees evil as a failure to properly align with the moral order, which again goes along with the three major monotheistic religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. So it is this diversion from the natural law that leads us to evil. So we look at this problem of excessive pleasure, poop, and the extent it has on the problem of evil. We look at Thorndike's law of effect, which posits that all animals, including humans, are hardwired to seek pleasure and avoid pain. Augustine observed that evil always injures, and such injury is a deprivation of good, as mentioned earlier. If there was no deprivation, there would be no injury. Since all things are made with goodness, evil must be the privation of goodness, which is something I always knew as a child, that God is good. Everything God does is good. So I never quite understood how man could interfere with God's plan and cause things to be bad. Um, Certainly God's creation is good also, but in order to be a more perfect creation, we have to be given free will. And when given free will, bad things will happen. I know this as a father myself. My children are given free will and they're angels, and sometimes they are devils. And this dominion or diminishment of property of goodness is what is called evil. So good has a substantial being, evil does not. And binary opposites, that separates itself from duality. Duality, the two are considered equal. And binary opposites, one is always considered to be superior to the other. I think biblical writers knew this very well as they presented. And so we have with good and evil. Good is substantial being, evil is not. It is like a moral whole, a nothingness that results when goodness is removed. Just as a shadow is no more than a hole in the light, evil is a hole in the goodness. Having previously stated the God is a perfect planner, it's important to consider the parallel between divine foreknowledge and will. God left humans without crucial knowledge of any parts of his will. He said to them, "It is not for you to know time or seasons that our Father has fixed by his authority." So obviously we are not privy to the whole plan. But having briefly considered that God as the perfect planner, and his plan is the perfect plan, we can presume or presuppose that this actual world and its creation is the best it is. If there were some world with as much good but less evil, that world would be better. Similarly, if there was a world with no evil, it would be even better. Therefore, the theist, it's not sufficient for us to say that this actual world is good. It also should not be held that this greater world with less evil is better. So I think this is where we answer our second question, that we cannot say that a world without evil would be better, because God is the perfect planner. So the world we live in is the best possible world it is. And we cannot say that somehow man corrupted or ruined God's plan, because God's foreknowledge and his will are parallel. God foresaw everything man was about to do. So it's not like he was caught off guard. Any research about a more perfect world that contains evil, we must talk about free will. Free will simply defined as the extent that a person or machine can achieve any different goals, good or bad. Of course, the Christian worldview is more liberty, the capacity to discern and pursue the good instead of merely being compelled by our appetites and desires. This, of course, is the intellect of the will. Being imago Dei, created in the image of God, our intellect is superior to our will. And we engage our intellect, we find ourselves not victim to our appetites and desires. Removal of free will. People who are induced to believe less in free will are more likely to behave immorally. This was a very fascinating research article I came across, and I left the reference on the bottom of the page. I was fascinated to read about the removal of free will inclines people to behave more immorally. And a lot of times you've heard just the opposite. right? So it's this idea of free will that causes people to do what morally is correct, which again I think kind of just strengthens my argument that we are good people. We are created good people, and we do good things. Evolutionary theory is very interesting since the process of evolution is dependent upon death and other forms of natural evil. Human existence is itself dependent upon natural evil. This is fascinating because I think this is a better answer for the woman who suffers a miscarriage than a pastor that tells her it's God's will. He's not incorrect when he says it's God's will, but it leaves the person with an incomplete idea in their head. Somehow God has willed this to happen. In other words, God foresaw this, planned this, and that this woman would get pregnant, and therefore then she would lose her child, and that was part of God's plan. And in fact, part of God's plan is a natural order, a world that has to have evil in it for humans to exist. I cannot imagine if, from the start of time, if we did not have death. Uh, Elon Musk wants to go to Mars, and I think this planet would have been doomed long before Elon Musk even showed up on the scene. So a more perfect being created in the image of God would possess the knowledge of good and evil. In other words, back in the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve could not be without the knowledge of good and evil. Good and evil was present well before Adam and Eve. And it was a very part process of being more than they are. It's kind of like how God brings men and women together, and that together we are better than we are separate because we bring forth life ourselves. In the same way that Adam and Eve could not stay the way they were, the more perfect created being would have had the knowledge of good and evil. And with that knowledge of good and evil, every human being capable of rational thought struggles with this back and forth all day long. This is what's known as the free will defense, as we talked about earlier. Without evil, without real adversity and conflict, there would be no possibility of moral development and spiritual maturity. In other words, it's this battle that makes us stronger and better. A Christian worldview is to see this in terms of suffering and honor. And that is exactly what brings us to be better than we are. I presented a series of logical arguments in support of my research. Rather than save you the pain of me reading those, I'll basically let you know that it starts with a binary opposite of love and hate. Uh, Love, of course, we are all familiar with, and hate, we are all familiar with. But the argument starts with the idea of those two as extremes of one another, and it presents God as love as we all know him to be. We are all familiar with this verse. Beloved, let us love one another, for love is from God, and whoever loves has been born of God and knows God. Anyone who does not love does not know God, because God is love. So the argument laid out is pretty simple. Is God is love or God is hate? God is not hate, therefore God is love. If God is love, then benevolent concern is for the good benefit of humans. Therefore, it makes sense, right? If you love something, you're going to be for the benefit of that very well thing. I love my children. Everything I do is for the benefit of my children. If God's benevolent concern is for the good benefit of humans, his actions, both the direct and indirect, must also be for the benefit of that. Again, this parallels me as a father. My actions show my love and my wanting to benefit my children. As stated, if God is love, then his actions are for the good benefit of us humans. If pain or evil was not helpful, then God would not allow it. He does allow it. Therefore, pain and evil is helpful. It must be helpful. It must be beneficial. We know this from earlier. If God used pain and evil for our benefit, then pain and evil is helpful. God does use pain and evil for our benefit. Therefore, pain is helpful. Evil is helpful. Pain is beneficial. Benefit is good. Pain is good. Parenting, as I said before, they're parallel. Parent often displays their love through unselfish, loyal, and benevolent concern for the good of their children. Similarly, God displays his love through the unselfish, loyal, and benevolent concern for his children, the good of his children. Just as parents allow their children to experience pain because they know it will benefit them, God uses pain also because he knows it will benefit us. In conclusion, research shows that evil isn't necessary. We know that our human survival depends on natural evil. And we also know moral evil is to an extent caused by our obsessive need for pleasure, which overrides our intellect, which we know as best as moral freedom. It's our ability to know what's good and pursue what's good rather than be dependent upon our passions or our desires. Another way to put it in the binary world is ugliness in the world is very much needed, mostly because it's part of the system. We need that. We need that very thing. If everything in the world was beautiful, there would be no beauty. If everything in the world was ugly, there would be no ugly. We need ugly and beauty. Good and evil, then, therefore, as in the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, shows a pair of opposites that refer to something greater than themselves. The tree symbolizes all that can be known. I include a body of literature covering the relevant issues that I have considered in the writing of this dissertation, and I will scroll through and to let you know, and let you see all that there is. And they are in alphabetical order, and I think that is the extent of them. I'll go back through them one more time the opposite direction if I can. I can't. I think let me go back. So, thank you very much, and I hope that answered all of your questions. I look forward to hearing from you. Good day.